Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to all of our panelists. We have a lot to cover in just 40 minutes, so I'm going to begin by having each one of you very briefly introduce yourself, tell us what you do and where you work, and I'd like for you to answer this question. What's one benefit, practice, policy, or behavior that you find particularly beneficial to your personal well-being? And this might be directly related to work or outside of work. We'll start with Chuck at the end.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chuck Abramo with Delaware North, and I'm the group vice president of HR. So I oversee several different HR groups. We are a global hospitality organization with about 55,000 team members spread across 4 countries. I would say the one benefit or behavior that is really important to me is, I'm going to go with 2, so sorry, flexibility and trust. I think when an organization trusts me to do my job and I trust my team and I can provide the flexibility for people to be their whole self, inside, outside work. I have a young daughter and I have a husband and we have obligations outside of work. We have obligations inside of work. The flexibility to be my whole person and capture and obligate to all those things, incredibly important to me and really helps my well-being, feeling like I'm a whole person. I'm filling kind of all the buckets of my life.
Morgan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan Bass-Roper, and I'm the head of strategic programming at BNY Mellon. BNY Mellon is a financial services firm. It's a global firm, 50,000 people strong, and it was founded 240 years ago by founding father and Broadway star Alexander Hamilton. And I lead our diversity programming. So that includes our employee and business resource groups, our learning around diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, our leadership development for underrepresented talent, and also our volunteer engagement with our corporate philanthropy partners, many of whom align with the values and vision and communities that we serve in our employee groups as well. I would say that a practice that I take that really helps to support my well-being is that I have a sacred block of time on my calendar, 2:30 to 3:30 on Friday afternoons, that is for therapy. And my team knows about it, my boss knows about it, everybody knows about it, and we do not schedule any meetings during that time. I don't move meetings. If there's something that's happening during that time, I'll keep that time sacred. So folks know, don't bother Morgan, she's getting her brain helped.
Allison?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Watson, founder and CEO of Modern Health. Modern Health is a global mental health platform for employers. So we partner with great companies all around the world to support them and their employees in prioritizing their mental health and making mental health a strength. So that looks like everything from therapy to coaching to digital content, group sessions, and more. And let's see, mine would be, I used to say sleeps. We all know sleep is so important, but now I have a 17-month-old, so that doesn't really happen. So I think for me, it's actually more being present with my son and putting my phone away. When I had my son, I was still trying to, after the nanny left, take calls and watch my son at the same time, which just I learned was impossible. So now I have this sacred hour from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. I don't schedule meetings over it. I don't take calls. I'm just present with my son until I put him to bed and then log back on and available as needed. And it's been life-changing for me.
And Matt?
Matthew Legere, Senior Vice President with Brown & Brown. So I head up our New York and New Jersey office, as well as a couple of teams in Massachusetts, predominantly employee benefits consulting. The national co-leader of the LGBT employee resource group for Brown & Brown as well. In terms of my favorite benefit, I did tell this group I was going to try to say colonoscopies with a straight face, but I can't do it. But let's keep the mood light, right? We want to have a fun time. But I would say employee resource groups. I think a lot of times we want to help employees feel seen, heard, valued, and understood. And to me, employee resource groups is a really organic way to see that community build, where you begin to kind of see ambassadors rise up and they perpetuate the message, so you don't feel like you're kind of doing that yourself. So for me, that's my favorite one.
Nothing wrong with a clean bill of health, though.
That is true. That is true.
And the rest that comes post-colonoscopy.
It is really good sleep.
I need to get a colonoscopy, apparently.
All right, so Allison, Modern Health, you work with a lot of clients across different industries. So you're in and out working with different partners. What cultural characteristics do you find that are common among employers that really succeed? in creating an environment that protects employee well-being? And what are characteristics of those that struggle with this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, it's about leaders leading with vulnerability. I think it's one thing to make an investment and a benefit, whether it's for mental health or fertility or for other ways of taking care of your overall mental or physical well-being, and then to say nothing about it and not practice what you preach, right? It's totally different when you have a leadership team who's open and honest about either prioritizing therapy every Friday at 2:30 p.m. or highlighting their own struggles and being honest and authentic. There's so much we can do in just how we show up. And so for us at Modern Health, I think a big part of it is really practicing what we preach, being open about prioritizing therapy. I'm very vocal as the founder and CEO of a mental health company. I have a therapist, I have a couples therapist, I have an executive coach, and I feel very fortunate. I'm very privileged to be able to be in a position where I get that level of support. And I certainly wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that level of support that helps me show up and hope to be able to do my best work. And I'm very vocal about that. So I think a big part of it is just being honest and open, leading with vulnerability, practicing what we preach. I share, like I gave that example of spending an hour with my son. I share that with my entire executive team. Hey, I'll be offline during this hour. I'm with my son. I'll be available online after. If you message me during this time, I'll check in after 7 p.m. So I just think modeling the behavior and leading by example that it's okay to do those things. And actually, a little fun story, this week between 6 and 7, I was messaging one of my employees and they were like, hey, isn't this like your sacred hour with your son Reese? Like, stop messaging me. So it really, and I smiled like, wow, it really has become embedded in this culture. And so I think it's little things like that. I think on the flip side, where companies struggle, it would be the inverse of that, not being open, not being honest, investing in a benefit, and then not feeling like you're, encouraged or empowered to use it, right? Being afraid to use a benefit that your employer has invested in. And then I think the other thing is employers struggle when they think there has to be a one-size-fits-all approach, right? There's different aspects of different populations want to engage in their health in very different ways. Mental health for someone might be seeing a therapist. For someone else, it might be getting that time away from work with their family and being able to attend their child's parent-teacher conference, right? It's these little things in life that might impact people differently. And so I think just taking a holistic approach and understanding that there's not one size fits all, especially as we see more and more workforces are global and have different needs across the world.
I want to talk a little bit more about what you just said about modeling healthy behavior. So it's popular among HR circles to talk about the need for business leaders. Lots of times those are people who do not report to you, of course. You're just begging them to model good behavior. To talk openly about this, to block off time on the calendar, to set that example. But I want to talk a little bit more about how that practically works. So is it about making a big speech in front of your workforce saying, I've struggled with my mental health, or this is what I do? Is it about announcing that one's going on vacation? Morgan, what are your recommendations for the modeling piece of this?
I think that what you shared is so important, that starting with vulnerability is so incredibly critical to making sure that other folks feel safe to share what it is that they're going through. So like I mentioned, I have my sacred time, 2:30 to 3:30. All my team knows, everybody knows that's Morgan's therapy time, which then means that my team then feels comfortable to say like, hey, I'm going through something. Somebody on my team just texted me. She was like, I'm really not feeling well. I need to take the day off. I know that you're at your panel. I hope that it goes well. Like, I'm just taking the day off. I'll put my time in the system. I was like, you always can do whatever you need to do. It's a trust building exercise, because then Courtney knows that like anything she needs, I've got her. And it's like, if I'm able to share who I am with her, she can do the same thing with me. And so I think a part of it is what you're modeling for your team or for your peers that you're working with, that it's like, we're humans. We're all at work. We're here to be productive, of course, but our humanity doesn't leave us just because we get to our desk. So I think one part of it is that, but I think the other piece, of course, particularly in my role that I'm privileged to get to do, is that I get to bring to our organization, who are the speakers that we want to bring in? in who are going to speak to our employee populations from an employee engagement perspective around different topics. And like, that's good modeling too. So we brought in an incredible speaker, highly recommend. She wrote a book called Maeve Rising, Coming Out Trans in Corporate America. And we did a fireside chat between her and our corporate affairs officer, so a member of our executive suite. And they had a conversation around authenticity in the workplace, allyship in the workplace, talking about the coming out journey, but in particular, talking about Maeve's mental health journey and how the resources that she received while she was coming out at her company, the allyship that she received was what allowed her to feel like she was comfortable to come out at work. She was out in her personal life, but not at work yet. And so I think that bringing that person to our company, which is a financial services company that's been around for over 200 years, like that's sending a message too. Like what folks were listening to that may have been like, oh, maybe I could feel comfortable sharing a little bit more of myself and my journey because it's being put on this big stage at work. So I think there's a kind of two-pronged way to think about that.
Allison, I want to come back to you for a moment. As a founder and as a senior executive, your experience is very different than that of someone who's an individual contributor. You need to be on call at odd hours. You're working weekends, no doubt. How do you continue to model good behavior if the nature of your job requires more of your time and energy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'd be lying if I said there was a silver bullet. Look, it's hard. I think one of the challenges in today's world is, first of all, the future generations are prioritizing work in a different way, right? If we even think about our parents' generation and how they prioritized work, and the world has changed so much with technology over the past few decades. If you think about, the smartphone hasn't been around for that long. And if we just think about how we've evolved and how we operate now, being tethered to technology, it used to be you went to work and you went home and you literally could not keep working. And now we're tethered to technology at all hours of all day, whether it's social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, kids using Snapchat, Instagram, whatever it is, right? We're constantly tethered to checking our email and being connected. And at the same time, I think it's tough because people are now thinking, okay, to have good mental health or have good physical health or just to be healthy, that means I need to turn off and not work. And I feel like there's kind of this gray area right now where people are feeling like they need to work less maybe in order to protect their mental health. I think there's a world where we can do both. We can take care of ourselves, prioritize our mental health, prioritize our physical health, and support people to reach their potential. And I'm a very big advocate of this, especially as a woman in leadership. There's not many of us. And as a mom, it's hard to do both. And so I think a big part of that is showing that you can do both, modeling the behavior, being open and honest about, hey, I live on the East Coast, the majority of my team's on the West Coast. And so I take calls late at night, but that allows me to have time in the morning with my son, with my family, with my husband, walking the dog. It allows me to have that sacred hour every day from 6 to 7 p.m. And it allows me to have what I call that kind of work-life integration where I'm balancing showing up as a mom and being able to hopefully be my best self at the times I can be with my family, and also being able to show up at work and realizing that you're never going to be perfect in both worlds. And a lot of life is sacrifice. There may be moments in my life where I need to prioritize my family over work, and the way I show up at work maybe slips a little bit, and I'm honest about that. Like, hey, this is a time where I need to focus on my family. It might be the opposite. I'm really focused on work. Maybe we were raising a round of funding. Maybe we're launching a big new client and I really need to be focused at work. And I'll let my family know, like, this is taking a back seat. I need extra nanny support, extra coverage right now for my son. And just giving ourselves that grace that life is hard and there's no perfect answer to this.
Chuck, you mentioned being a parent, and I also saw you nodding your head. So what was on your mind? How do you model good behavior? I mean, you're a VP, so you're very senior. You have a lot of people looking at you.
Yeah, listen, I think Allison touched on a lot of the things that are important. I think carving out the time, what I always tell people about that work-life balance is nobody is going to draw the line for your work-life balance other than you. Team's not going to do it for you. Oh, there it goes. Your spouse isn't going to do it for you. So making sure that you understand where your boundary is, both on the professional side and the personal side, is equally important. And know what that is and say, this is where I need to close the laptop today. This is where I have to, hang up the phone, whatever it is, to go be whoever that person that you need to be, if it's inside work, outside work. I would say, I mentioned flexibility in my introduction. That is really important to me, and that goes both ways. So I will jump on the computer at 10 p.m. at night because I want to, and that's a time where I can kind of get caught up without getting interrupted. But I will think nothing of, quite frankly, like at 3 o'clock, like maybe signing off for the day because we're doing something as a family. And I think that flexibility and knowing that I can do that without blame, without somebody looking at me sideways about it, is incredibly important. And creating that culture within an organization is key. And you could never put a dollar amount on it. I could never get X amount of comp at a different organization. I had to have it replace that flexibility. So, it's having a lot of balls in the air at one time. Yes, some are going to get dropped, and that's okay. But I think if we can show up as our authentic selves and our team knows that we are there, we're trying. Maybe we slipped that one day, but that's okay. So, my nuggets to add.
Organizations that are really large and distributed are challenged to provide individualized benefits for their workers. Matt, how do you offer well-being support that's both individual and consistent across teams and job types?
In our role, predominantly, we are trying to structure working with customers on how they're offering their employee benefits. We're trying to kind of use the employee benefits program and some of the culture surrounding that with the other offerings to help the employees feel seen, heard, valued, and understood. I think some of it comes through looking at your people from a variety of different lenses. Typically, we will step back and say, a couple of different lenses you could look at your plan is from a wellness perspective: physical, emotional, financial, social. Looking at it from a location perspective, some of you may know, if you think about your organization, some locations, let's say they have a mind of their own or a culture of their own, and you can't apply broad-based philosophies to every single location in a way that makes sense. Some locations may also have particular language needs that you have to be aware of. I know I went to El Salvador with my husband, and I'm learning Spanish, but it's gonna take a bit, okay? Let's be honest. And that was a really good experience for me to realize, walking through the airport, let's just say, and I'm like, do I go left or do I go right? And not knowing what to do, and realizing, okay, wow, if we have a location where there's a really large population of Spanish speaking and those with Haitian Creole, do they feel valued if we can't communicate something that's really complex in a way that they can understand, right? So it's trying to look through those lenses, as well as all the different elements of human diversity, the different milestones, I think, as well. You have to think about, we had one client say, well, I don't really know if we really have much of a need to think about from an LGBT benefit perspective. And we just said, okay, well, if you may not know for your particular population, assuming your hiring practices match the national averages, I think the latest number was 7.2% of the US population identifies, 1 in 5 of Gen Z. So if you were to take your 5,000 members and extrapolate that percentage, they stepped back and went, whoa, that's a lot higher than I thought. So it's trying to, if you look at your plan through a variety of lenses, who are your avatars, the average representations of your people, even if it's over a multi-year period, can you begin to help huge chunks of people at various times feel seen through the offerings that you have?
Chuck, Delaware North, of course, has a lot of office workers and a lot of people who work on their feet. They're on the ground all day. How do you think about providing well-being support that's both individual and consistent? Because there's so many different job types at Delaware North.
Absolutely, and I'll explain that a little bit in terms of job types. We have everyone from salaried professionals working for us to hourly part-time to people who only work for us 10 times a year. Maybe they work in a stadium and there's 10 football games a year, and so they're working those 10 days. That is a very wide range of needs. And knowing that our team members' needs come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, our strategy has been is build the widest library possible in terms of benefits to meet those individual needs. But then on top of that, allowing our general managers, we have about 170 units across the globe, allowing our general managers to add on top of that when it's needed for a team member, a specific team member population, a geographic region, and allowing that to be a differentiator. So we call it flexibility within a framework. So the framework is the benefits that we provide, and that acts as the foundation. And I would also say that that is exacerbated by our team member listening surveys. We do a lot of listening to our team members to try to understand what they want. Because I think what happens sometimes is, we're all guilty of it, is, us in some boardroom or conference room, and we say, this is what the team members want, but we haven't asked them. And so getting curious about what our team members will say, and that is what led us to say, general managers, add on top of our already established benefits what you think your team members want. And it allows the general managers and our leaders to be a differentiator out there, and they are competing with people down the street, and providing that wide range of benefits has been really beneficial to retention, development, engagement, and then our team members' mental health as well.
In those listening exercises, has there been anything that's particularly surprised you, as in we thought they wanted this, but then they wanted this?
I would say, good question. That was not scripted, by the way. So I'm going to give this some thought. I would say in terms of how they want to be communicated to, I think we took for granted that they really wanted electronic communication. About 40% of our team member base is in the Gen Z or the millennial population. And we thought electronic communication was the way to go. And really what we heard from them is, no, I want my manager to talk to me. I want, I want to hear from them. And again, you're dealing with locations with 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 team members. So that in-person communication is really important to them to feel like they're not just getting lost in 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000.
Since 2020, many employers have learned to prepare themselves to respond to social, political, cultural, public health events to protect workers' safety and their well-being. How do you choose, Morgan, we'll go to you first, how do you choose what the company will respond to and the mode that it will use to respond, keeping in mind health and well-being?
The first thing that I'll say is that it is an art and not a science. And that you mentioned 2020, that was such an inflection point around the way that we were having conversations with our employees, right? And that the employee voice became so much more centralized, I think, even than it had been previously. And what I always say is we are called the people team. We rebranded from being HR a couple years ago. And that my role, the way that I think about my role, sorry, I'm covering my mic, is that I'm a people person. My job, I feel, is to have my ear on the ground and to hear exactly what it is that the people of BNY Mellon need. What do they want? What do they want from the company? And that requires deep listening to our employees. And a huge vehicle of that is our employee and business resource groups. 12,000 of our 50,000 person population are members of those groups. And we have 6 of the groups. They serve all of our different marginalized identities there, not all of them, but many of them. And building deep relationship with the members of people who are in those groups, they then know that they can come to me when they're feeling something, so that there's a saturation of a particular topic. We can then decide what we want to do, how we want to move forward. So one of the modes that we've utilized around different crises, whether that's a tragedy, whether that's a war, whether that's an attack on a particular racial demographic that we know that a particular community is hurting, what are we going to do for our people, has been partnering really closely with our well-being colleagues to host sessions with one of our, whether it's an on-site therapist that we have, or whether it's a therapist that we have kind of in our stable of therapists that we rely on who have affinity with that group who's been affected. So in Florida, for example, when there have been legislation that may be adversarial, to use a nice fancy word, to the LGBTQ plus community, we have a particular therapist that we lean on, who's a queer therapist, to come and talk to that community and say, let's do a session in Florida in partnership with our LGBTQ plus ERG and give people an opportunity to just talk. How are folks feeling? What do you need? What would be beneficial? What would be beneficial for us to do? And because it's not us hosting it, because it's an external party, they're more apt to share because they're not talking to HR, And I think that one thing that I feel really grateful for is that I have been able to build some really strong rapport with some of our colleagues, and oftentimes, and many folks in the room who are DEI practitioners, this, that they might come to us and share something, but they may not be ready to put that thing on to take it to employee relations, let's say, right? And it's like, you need to be the safe space for folks to be able to share, hey, I'm having this issue with my manager, or hey, my mom is having suicidal ideation. What do I do about that? Like, I don't want to tell anybody that. Like, how do I handle this? And it gives us the opportunity to then say, like, okay, well, this we would handle with, these are the resources that we have available. We get 12 sessions of paid therapy for you and for your family for working here. So here, like, take these resources. But when there's something that's a global situation, then do we handle it through therapy? Do we handle it through a communication to all of our employees? Do we handle it through an external statement? Like, those are conversations that we're having, working with our partners across the people team. But I feel blessed because the people of BNY Mellon, often I'm taking the lead from them.
I would just add too, Morgan, you had mentioned earlier about vulnerability. With those messages, there's no way we're going to get it right 100% of the time. And recently there was a message that had gone out, and one of my employees came to me and said, that's great that you sent out a message on this, but what about what's happening in Armenia? And immediately I just took the humble approach to say, I'm sorry, I don't have it all figured out. Talk to me. What do I not know? Right? And it's just trying to, I think, expressing that vulnerability. The hope is that people will still feel seen in that moment, even if it wasn't in the original moment. And we use that to kind of learn and keep getting better. But I thought back to your vulnerability comment.
In addition to things like individualization and scale, benefits professionals will also struggle with timing. That's incredibly difficult. Allison, I'm going to pose this one to you first. So workers tend to care about benefits most in the moment that they need them. They might sit through the onboarding session where they hear about everything and go, great, but until it's time for them to use them, they may have forgotten by then. So benefits leaders have to be good at timing. How can employers deliver benefits to employees in the moments that they need them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it somewhat connects to the previous one, because I think one of the biggest things that companies can do is realize that humans are humans, and you can't compartmentalize what's happening in your personal life and what's at work. And especially with how often we are inundated by technology and information, when there's a world event going on and it's affecting a certain group or a subset of the population, people are hearing about it all the time. It's impossible for them to be able to just show up at work and at their desk and over Zoom or in person and just think, oh yeah, I'm just gonna turn that off and be able to focus perfectly here and not be thinking about this massive event that's happening that's affecting me or people I care about or loved ones. And so that kind of ties into, well, how do we communicate benefits at the right moment? Because it may be that there's an on-site therapist in that moment that can benefit that person. But I really think it's thinking about the points at someone's personal and professional journey and finding ways to communicate to them during those moments. And so everything from starting a new job, so new hire onboarding, communicating benefits, of course, that's somewhat of an obvious one. Getting promoted to being a manager, managing other people. It's a big moment to support people, whether it's through coaching, other support, peer support, more trainings around being a new manager and how they can communicate and support their own direct reports. Having a difficult conversation, having to let someone go, having to give someone difficult feedback, having to fire someone, having to hire someone. These are continued journeys along someone's professional journey and experience. And the same is true that there's all these points around someone's personal. It could be getting married, having kids, getting divorced, dealing with the loss of a loved one, taking care of a sick parent, right? All these moments along someone's personal life are moments and opportunities for us to communicate all the amazing benefits that are out there that employers are investing in today to support people at that direct moment. And I think it's tricky because you don't want to inundate employees with information so that it just feels like noise and they're ignoring it. It has to feel very personalized, but it also, you don't want to go over the line of feeling creepy in a way that you have information about them that they don't want you to know. And so one example would be someone finding out they're pregnant and now there's a benefit that's specific to that. How do you communicate in that in a way that feels authentic and organic and doesn't feel like, oh, my employer has information about me that I don't want to know? So I think it's being very thoughtful and strategic, having a very thorough communication strategy, working with your people team to map out what that strategy looks like, looking at all those points along the professional, mapping them out, professional and personal journey, and finding where the benefits slot in and how you communicate them across the board.
Matt, what would you add? How do you have good timing?
I actually think back to what Chuck, you had mentioned about we don't know what they need till we ask them, right? But I think we could all agree that the role of the employer is expanding. If you look at what the employers are expected, even think about this conversation, right? Were we talking about this 10, 15 years ago? I think you have to be relevant to what the employees are talking about or stressed out about at their kitchen table. When they get into the car and they pick up the phone and the first person that they complain to, are you as an employer offering something that's relevant in those moments? I think even around, you mentioned like losing somebody, but I think about bereavement. Just a quick personal story, we had a miscarriage. And I remember I worked for a large national health insurance carrier. And when I requested bereavement leave, they said, well, because the baby wasn't actually born yet, you don't qualify. So you can take unpaid leave if you'd like. I'm not still working there, I can tell you that, because I didn't feel seen, valued. But even simply of somebody having a family friend, in my life, I lost most of my family overnight when I came out. So I've had to make new family. So typical bereavement policies wouldn't serve me. I've had other people step up to become brothers and sisters and father figures and mother figures in my life. And with that, a typical policy wouldn't serve me. So I think it's trying to find creative ways to think through how can we be relevant in those moments, in those conversations, and building something that communicates value at those milestones.
I think too that like you also mentioned the kind of mode at which you're communicating with folks is that like people intake the information differently. So I think that sometimes as people, team practitioners, we can be like, well, the information all exists out there and we know how to navigate to it because we're on the team. And so one thing that we're implementing is that we're doing a community roadshow and we're going to do live, virtual, global sessions. Maybe we're going to do 15 of them or something around the globe. And we're going to be just taking employees through. Here are learning and development offerings. Here are philanthropy offerings. Here are belonging and inclusion offerings. Here are well-being offerings. This is what they are. This is how you can get involved and who has questions. And just giving people like a live person to talk to and ask questions to. And that may not appeal to some people. They may just say like, just send me the deck after so I can click through the right links. But there will be some folks who will say like, oh, I didn't know that we even offered that. And now they have the opportunity to hear about the things that we can give them. So I think that figuring out the different modes to share the information is helpful too.
Something that all of you have touched on in one way or another is the importance of relationships. You just kind of mentioned this, Matt, and how the people in your life who have stepped up to be your family, those are the really important relationships in your life. How do workplace relationships affect our well-being? And how can HR leaders facilitate good working relationships, especially when an organization has tens of thousands of employees? You can't sit down and have everybody, I don't know, play ping pong or something. Give us something better than that, please, Chuck.
Excellent. Well, I think about this question and I, encourage everybody to like close their eyes for like 3 seconds and just think about the relationships you have at work. And I hope that there's somebody that comes to mind that you think, oh my God, I have so much fun with this individual, and they make the workday better. And if, making the workday better, we mentioned earlier how much of work is a part of our life, and I actually did the math last night, and a regular 40-hour work week, which I think most salary professionals tend to work more, takes up about a little over 22% of your time. And that's not factoring sleep. So if you think about 22% of your time, I hope in that 22% of your time, there is somebody that you enjoy spending that time with. And if there's not, I think that's where you have to look at your values and what you want to do, and does that align to your organization's values? And I think value alignment there sounds a little cheesy, but it's so important because for me, it goes back to purpose. And are you sharing that 22% of your time with people who share the same purpose as you? And if not, then I think that's where you think, God, is this maybe the best place for me? Am I surrounded by the best people? And so, as HR leaders, I think it's one, to make sure that as we've defined that along with leadership, we have defined what that purpose is and our values, so that we can tell people as we're bringing them on board. And we can, to take this to the other side, hold people accountable to those values. And when behaviors aren't what they should be in an organization, we can address it when it's a small, what I like to use the analogy of like smoking sticks instead of a big bonfire. We can address it when it's smoking sticks. And I think that helps foster an environment where people can work effortlessly together. And to add on to it, I would say that in HR, we sit in a unique seat where we see a lot. Not a huge sports fan, so the analogy might not land, but we see the entire scoreboard. And it is a unique position to be in, and we can connect people in the organization to say, hey, you're having this problem right now at work, like so is this person, and connecting them and to build the relationships there. And I think that's incredibly important, is to connect people from various parts of the organization when there are tens of thousands of individuals, because they're not organically going to run into one another all the time. So a couple things that, that HR plays a part in terms of building that connection is really the level setting of the values, how we enforce those values and embrace them, and then how we act as connectors between groups.
Allison, as someone who, you're a people leader and people are looking at you, like we talked about earlier, to model behavior. How do you think about working relationships and making those a conduit for a good place to be?
Yeah, I really loved what you shared around just the relationships that you build at work. When you think about the places you've worked, you think about the people, right? When you think back to places you worked or where you work now, like, and you just close your eyes and you think about it, it's people that come to mind. The relationships you have, who you enjoy working with, maybe who you don't enjoy working with. Hopefully you enjoy most of the people you work with. And when you look back on places where you've worked, the places where you've arguably had the biggest impact or had the most fun or been the most fulfilling is where you've built those long-lasting relationships, and you likely are still talking to those people or still have relationships with those people even post working at said company. So I think for us as employers, we can play a big role in fostering that, really creating a culture where people do connect. I get so excited when I hear about employees going to each other's weddings, hanging out outside of work. We're calling it our first modern baby. We had 2 Modern Health employees that got married and had a baby, so it's our first modern baby. And it's amazing. It's so fulfilling because while of course I'm so passionate about what we do at Modern Health, it's so exciting to see people who are going to look back on their time at Modern Health, because the reality is no one works at one company forever. And they're going to see that it had a huge positive impact on their personal lives. And that's, the most that we can hope for, ask for as employers. And so I think it's really finding ways to facilitate that. I think it's hard to do over Zoom. We are a fully remote company. We've seen now the impact that remote work has on all of our mental health. And I say this as someone who lives on the East Coast, majority of my team's on the West Coast. So we're not going back to an office full time by any means, but we're opening up an office in San Francisco so we can have a headquarters for people to get together if they'd like. We're trying to find ways to carve out budget. It's expensive for people to get together in person, but really to prioritize, invest, and support that, because we as humans crave human connection. So whether you're in a manager role or a people role or a leadership role, finding ways to facilitate that. If it's over Zoom during a happy hour or just kicking off a meeting with the first 5 minutes, let's all check in. What is something someone did this past weekend, or what's a fun plan someone has this upcoming weekend? Check in, get to know each other, get to know each other's family and friends and what's important to them. And so really facilitating that and fostering that. If you can, prioritize in person. People leave in-person meetings, in-person offsites so energized. Like they've just been craving this human connection. And so that's something that as a company that has gone fully remote, but is seeing the value of human connection and being together in person, we're trying to figure out how can we balance that and how can we do both.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I would like to talk about the in-office experience. So I'm sure many folks here, like myself, really like working from home. I love that. But many have been given the directive that in-office is how it's supposed to be now. So how do you create an in-office experience that's not only worth making the commute, but also conducive to employee well-being? Allison, you're exempt from this question because you just said you got a mostly fully remote workplace, but anybody else, we'll start with Chuck down at the end. Any advice you have for making the in-office experience a good one?
Yeah, and I'll try to be quick, but I am going to nerd out for just a second. So there's something called the Herzberger 2-factor theory, which is about, he takes hygiene motivators and, or hygiene factors and motivators. And basically in the hygiene factor, these are the things that people come to expect. Can I get parking? Is there a seat for me? Do I have the equipment that I need? And you are going to do all those things, and it's going to take you as an employer a lot of work to do. And you are going to get absolutely no credit for it. And that is okay. All that's doing is preventing disengagement and frustration. But then on the other side, you have the motivational factors. That's going to be the in-office programming, how you connect people in the office, what you do for development and engagement within the office. That's going to motivate. So on one side, you need to prevent disengagement via the parking and whatnot. And on the other side, you got to create engagement with some of those higher level activities like, again, programming and bringing in speakers, bringing people together. It might be a gift wrapping seminar or whatever it is around the holidays. Whatever you can do to bring people together to say, hey, that was value added, and I'm so glad I came to work today.
I would say to team building. Like, I think that we think it's cornball convention, and sometimes it can be, but I think that finding an opportunity to get your team together, whether that's through, I think volunteering is a really good way to do that, to be like, come into the office, we'll work for half the day, we're gonna then volunteer for the rest of the half of the day, and then we're gonna go have dinner after. And like spending time, meaningful time together, working together, giving back together, and then spending quality time together. That like make it an experience, give it a full vibe, can help to make it a better time.
We'll end on full vibe. Thank you so much to our panelists, Chuck, Morgan, Allison, and Matt. Thank you so much for being here. This has been really, really helpful. I appreciate it.